It was supposed to be an auction only the richest could touch. Velvet ropes, gold leaf catalogs, secret nods and whispered bids, worth more than most could earn in a lifetime. A forgotten castle, heavy with dust and legends, rumored hidden. Vaults, century-old gold, walls that had heard kings beg and queens plot. They came dressed for victory, sleek black suits, gowns that shimmered like spilled champagne, smiles sharpened to a blade. Cameras flashed. Old money smiled politely at new money trying too hard. Every breath smelled of power, entitlement, and the quiet thrill of winning what others couldn't even dream to touch. And then, he appeared. A lone black man, quiet as morning fog, wearing a faded hoodie and well-worn sneakers. No entourage, no shiny watch, no glossy catalog in hand. Just calm eyes, steady steps, and a silence so strange it turned heads, then whispers into laughter. They thought he was lost, astray in the wrong kingdom. They had no idea this quiet stranger was about to change everything they thought they owned. He moved through the marble foyer like someone who'd walked grander halls but never needed to prove it, past portraits of long-dead dukes and duchesses glaring down from cracked oil paint, past velvet chairs where billionaires sipped champagne and pretended patience. His hoodie brushed against gold-trimmed velvet ropes, drawing side eyes sharpened by quiet cruelty. A pair of brothers from an old banking dynasty leaned in, chuckling into flutes of vintage crystal. An heiress, wrapped in pearls worth more than the average estate, pretended not to see him, but couldn't stop staring. Their body language shouted what their lips never quite dared. Doesn't belong, can't possibly bid, must be some assistant, or worse, an intruder. Behind the laughter, there was something sharper, fear wrapped in mockery, because even old money senses when a storm is coming, even if it doesn't look like them. The auctioneer, in tailored blacktails, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. In these circles, everything is for sale, but decorum must be kept, at least until the hammer falls. The man in the hoodie paused near the grand staircase, traced his fingers across a centuries-old stone banister. He seemed to listen to the walls themselves, as if the whispers of the past meant more than the present sneers. Somewhere in the back row, a real estate mogul joked under his breath. Maybe he thinks there's a basketball court inside. And polished laughter sparkled louder than the chandeliers. But the man in the hoodie kept moving, unhurried. He had come not just to watch, not just to dream, but to do something none of them would see coming. Something that would stain their laughter into memory, and echo far beyond stone walls and gold trim. He drifted past marble pillars older than the country itself, past iron chandeliers hung so high they seemed to float on candlelit shadows. The air smelled of old stone, melted wax, and perfume that cost more than most people's yearly salary. A hush rippled through the hall as he stopped near the center aisle, just close enough for every sneer to reach his ears. To the left, a group of hedge fund heirs comparing watch faces, diamond-crusted bezels catching the auction lights. To the right, an elderly countess, eyes sharp behind opera glasses, whispering into her companion's ear. Every glance at him carried the same silent question, thinly veiled in amusement. Why is he here? He wore scuffed sneakers that had seen real city sidewalks, a plain hoodie that might have come from a corner thrift store. No gold cufflinks, no family crest on a silk tie. Nothing about him matched the setting, yet nothing about him looked uncomfortable either. The auctioneer tapped the gavel lightly, calling for quiet, but curiosity hummed through the air. As the opening lot was announced, an antique tapestry rescued from a crumbling tower, the man barely turned his head. Instead, he let his gaze roam the broken stone arches, the faded coat of arms chiseled above the main fireplace. What did he see? Not just wealth or history, but the stories trapped in every crack. The years when these walls sheltered families now forgotten. He imagined how wind must have howled through these halls on winter nights, how servants might have huddled in kitchens, how nobles danced under candlelight, unaware that time would reduce their legacy to an auction lot. And standing there, as laughter rolled around him like marble dice, he remembered why he'd come. This wasn't about the price of stone or title deeds. It was about what couldn't be priced. Dignity, shelter, a chance to rewrite the ending of an old story. One bidder, loud with bravado, joked that the castle would make a fine exclusive club, as long as security keeps the riffraff out. He sneered, not bothering to lower his voice. The man in the hoodie didn't blink. Instead, he placed a quiet hand on the stone ledge beside him, as if to say, "Your laughter is loud. But the walls remember other voices, too." The chandeliers trembled slightly in the summer breeze slipping through broken panes. Dust danced in the shafts of afternoon light, ancient particles catching brief golden brilliance before drifting into shadow again. In that moment, he knew, history is just old stone, until someone dares to build hope inside it again. And still, no one suspected. The quiet man with city-worn sneakers would do more than watch. No one knew that in the folds of his hoodie lay the power to outbid every old name in the room, and a plan bigger than any luxury hotel or private spa. He didn't come to take, he came to give. And the day's laughter would echo differently, by sunset. The bidding began with polite nods and lifted paddles, the rhythm almost ceremonial. A tapestry here, a cracked marble bust there, each going to buyers whose family names had opened doors for generations. Every hammerfall was met with soft applause, the sort of applause that meant nothing, offered by those who expected to win, and felt entitled to every victory. He stood unmoving, his hands deep in the hoodie pockets, gaze drifting over vaulted ceilings where time had peeled away paint to reveal older designs underneath. Designs no decorator could copy, because they'd been painted by hands long turned to dust. Patterns layered by centuries, each layer a story, and here he was. Just another chapter nobody had read yet. As the next lot, an engraved silver chalice appeared on a velvet-draped pedestal. A ripple of excitement rose. Rumor said it dated back to a wedding that united rival kingdoms, a cup from which peace itself had been toasted. The auctioneer's voice rang clear. Opening bid, $100,000. To his left, a woman in a pearl choker raised her paddle. Instantly, a glimmer of triumph in her eyes. Another man, heavy signet ring, gleaming, countered without hesitation. Back and forth they went, the numbers climbing in careful steps, each bid sharpened by silent calculation. What will it be worth tomorrow? Not one of them thought about the promise once whispered over that silver rim, only resale value. He didn't move, didn't bid. Instead he watched them, really watched. The way hands tightened around paddles, the quickening breath, the gleam of sweat above tailored collars. They didn't look at the chalice as history or beauty, they looked at it as weight and price per ounce. Eyes that measured only gold. In that moment, something became painfully clear. For these people, the castle itself was little more than a commodity, a playground for prestige, an asset to flip or boast about at black tie galas. Yet in his mind, he pictured the dining hall alive again, children running over cracked tiles, elders warming hands by the ancient hearth, not marble statues for the rich to admire, but walls that could shelter real lives, not a trophy, a refuge. Behind him, a group whispered about his presence, failing to keep their voices down. Maybe he's security, or a driver who wandered in. A ripple of laughter passed from one to the next. Quick as a match strike, he didn't flinch. Instead, his gaze shifted to the castle's battered wooden doors, where daylight streamed in. Through those doors, people once entered seeking protection from storms, wars, and ruin. Could those doors open again? Not for profit, but for mercy. The silver chalice sold for nearly $500,000. The buyer, a banker's daughter, accepted the polite applause with a practiced smile, as though she'd won a prize at a charity ball. Still, no one noticed the man in the hoodie. No one saw the glint of resolve hardening in his eyes. And as the auctioneer cleared his throat, preparing to announce the day's crown jewel, the castle itself, he knew the moment of truth was drawing close. They saw only a ruin to rebuild and sell. He saw a sanctuary waiting to be reborn. A hush settled, game of vanity was about to end, and a very different game was about to begin. At last, the auctioneer's gavel tapped the podium twice, a sign everyone recognized. Heads turned. Conversations cut mid. Even the rustle of silk dresses seemed to freeze. Ladies and gentlemen, he intoned, voice echoing against carved stone arches. The final lot this afternoon, the castle itself, a once majestic fortress, abandoned these past decades steeped in legend and opportunity. A wave of excitement shivered through the hall. Not the quiet thrill of art collectors bidding on a rare painting. This was the kind of lot that drew empire builders, hedge fund titans, and whispered royals with silent wealth. This was power in stone, heritage you could own. In that pause, everyone forgot the man in the hoodie. All eyes fixed on the grand, time-worn walls projected on the screen behind the auctioneer, cracked battlements, ivy-draped towers, and shattered windows hinting at lost grandeur. Then came the words that hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Bidding will open at $10 million. A few deep breaths, a clearing of throats. Then the first paddle shot into the air. A billionaire hotel magnate known for buying castles and turning them into luxury spas. The second followed, a tech heiress with a taste for European ruins. Numbers rose like a drumbeat. 11, 12, 13 million. No one wanted the ruin. They wanted what the ruin could become under the spotlight of their brand. Another gleaming fortress of exclusivity. The man in the hoodie didn't raise his hand. He stood unmoving, head slightly bowed, as if listening to something deeper than voices. The faint echo of the people who once walked these halls. Knights and cooks, servants and scholars, lovers who carved initials into hidden stones, souls erased by centuries of dust. The auctioneer's chant quickened, sweat beading on his forehead. 14, 15, 16 million. Hands moved in practiced flicks, each gesture worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Then it slowed. At 17 million, the tech heiress hesitated, a frown creasing her brow. At 18 million, the hotel magnate's wife whispered urgently to her husband. They knew the risks. Restoration costs could triple, historical societies could block permits, the local council might demand public access. It was no longer a trophy, it was becoming a gamble. The hush deepened, eyes darted, calculating, doubting. Through it all, he remained still. Yet inside, memory burned like a lantern. The quiet promise he'd made years ago to his mother to build something lasting, something that gave instead of took. Then, In the breath between the auctioneer's words, a voice rang out. 20 million, a single number, steady and calm. All heads whipped around. It was him, the man no one had counted. The man whose hoodie spoke of street corners, not marble halls. For the first time, the room truly saw him, and for the first time, they didn't know what to see. Shock flared across jeweled faces. Frowns deepened. Hands tightened on paddles. Then slowly lowered. The auctioneer swallowed. His practiced mask slipped for half a second, just long enough to reveal surprise. 20 million, he repeated, voice softer now. Do I hear 21? Silence. Outside. A bird caught in the ivy. Dust motes spun in a shaft of sunlight. Inside. The quiet said everything. They hadn't come to lose to a man like him, but no one raised another bid. At that moment, centuries seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see if a broken castle could belong to someone who saw it not as profit, but as purpose. The hush in that ancient auction hall wasn't just surprise, it was disbelief solidifying into something colder. How could he, a man dressed like an outsider, step into their world and drop a number that made seasoned moguls hesitate? Eyes narrowed. Some smirked, trying to hide their unease behind amusement. Others whispered behind raised hands. Gold watches glinting. He can't possibly cover that bid. Must be a stunt. Someone dared him. They'll throw him out soon enough. The auctioneer cleared his throat, voice cracking with an edge of respect tinged by caution. 20 million, going once. A pause, longer than etiquette, allowed going twice. No new paddle rose. The room held its collective breath, caught between the ruin's ghostly past and the shock of the present. Sold. The gavel came down, its sound reverberating through cracked marble and whispered disbelief. In that instant, something invisible shifted. Centuries of silent stone seemed to exhale, as if the castle itself welcomed a master who saw beyond. Gold leaf and gala balls. Across the room, the tech heiress lowered her eyes, her ambition flickering into embarrassment. The hotel magnate stared with forced calm, jaw tight, mind racing through PR, damage control. A few guests half laughed, half choked on champagne, unsure how to respond when someone they dismissed rewrote the ending. And in the center of it all, the man in the hoodie barely moved. He didn't pump a fist in victory or look around to catch the stares. He simply nodded once, like a promise kept. But the walls saw what the crowd didn't. Under the brim of that hoodie, quiet eyes, not hardened by conquest, but heavy with memory, a memory of a mother's trembling voice. Promise me, if you ever have enough, build something that matters. For them, somewhere outside the grand doors, cameras clicked, catching the final gavel stroke. In minutes, the photo would race through screens and feeds. A nameless black man in a simple hoodie outbids the rich for a forgotten castle. But what the photo wouldn't show was the deeper silence, heavier than gold. That moment when the room realized its money couldn't outbid someone with a different kind of wealth. A purpose. Not power over people, but power for them. And while the rich in polished suits tried to hide their frowns behind polite applause, he saw past them, past the walls and chandeliers to something older, waiting, needing to be reborn. As the gavel's echo died away, time itself seemed to pause. Dust hung in shafts of pale afternoon light, swirling above the cracked marble like ghostly dancers. And in that hush, the man in the hoodie didn't smile, didn't look for applause, he simply breathed. Because for him, this wasn't a game. It wasn't revenge against the scoffs or the side eyes. It was the next chapter of a vow made long ago, whispered to a frail woman who believed even when the world didn't. If you ever can, build something that matters. And now he could. The auctioneer's final words still floated in the air, but inside the man's mind, older voices spoke louder, his mother's lullabies about dignity, the preacher's sermons about stewardship over vanity, and the quiet prayers of neighbors he'd watched lose homes to greed and concrete towers. He didn't see the castle the way that billionaires did, as a trophy to polish or a brand to sell. He saw cold stone halls as warmth waiting to happen, empty ballrooms as beds for the weary, silent towers as classrooms for the forgotten. Every fallen arch and most over stair seemed to whisper, "Give us purpose again." As security ushered him toward the office to finalize the paperwork, the hush in the crowd gave way to awkward chatter. Some laughed to cover discomfort. Some texted furious messages to lawyers and PR teams. Others filmed, catching fragments of a story no headline could fully explain. But the man in the hoodie didn't hear them, because in his heart burned a different kind of fire, not sparked by insult or anger, but by hope. The castle wasn't the prize. The prize was what he could do with it, and the difference between him and the room full of heirs and moguls was simple. They bought stone to look powerful. He bought it to make others feel powerful. Outside, the evening sun cast golden light on ivy-choked towers, turning ruin into something regal once more. And for the first time in decades, the stones themselves seemed to listen, sensing an owner who saw not just what they were, but what they could be. And so, with a single nod, the quiet black philanthropist stepped into history, not to inherit its ghosts, but to free them. It started as a whisper, a single notification on a financial news app that barely drew a thumb's pause. Unknown bidder acquires derelict Chateau Bellargin at auction. Within minutes, The headline mutated because curiosity breeds curiosity, and silence makes the world lean closer. A journalist checked tax filings. A blogger dug through obscure foundation paperwork. A board intern found the bidder's name, tucked inside an old deed transfer. Elias Blackwell, philanthropist, low profile but carrying an investment portfolio that dwarfed many hedge funds. The man in the hoodie now had a name, and the story took its first breath. Social media lit up. Skeptics sparring with romantics. Who buys a rotting castle in cash? Probably laundering money. No, I've heard about him. He builds shelters and clinics. This could be real. A TikTok video of the moment the gavel fell went viral in hours. The comment section, splitting into thousands of opinions. Yet one question echoed louder than the rest. Why would a billionaire dress like that? By evening, mainstream media smelled the blood of a headline too human to resist. They scrambled old photos. Elias in battered sneakers at a community garden. Elias cutting a ribbon at a free clinic. Elias pushing a wheelchair at a care home opening. The narrative crystallized. The quiet black billionaire who spends his fortune on the invisible and forgotten, and just shocked old money by buying their crumbling jewel. But no one yet understood what he planned to do with it, and the mystery only sharpened the appetite. In hotel boardrooms and penthouse offices, rich heirs and developers cursed softly over brandy glasses. The castle wasn't valuable on paper, but its story was, and they'd just been out by a man they'd dismissed as background noise. A legend was forming, and legends don't ask permission. Yet for Elias Blackwell, back in a rented sedan, idling outside the castle gates, the world's noise felt distant. His mind was already racing ahead. Legal paperwork, surveys, structural engineers, historians, shelter coordinators. Outside the window, the castle loomed, moonlight turning ivy to silver. He saw not just ruin, but readiness. Some people wait for permission. Elias Blackwell moved when hearts were still doubting, because hope does not wait. By midnight, hashtags trended. Hashtag castle for the people. Hashtag black philanthropist legend. Hashtag from sneakers to stone. And with every share, every tweet, the sneer of the elite turned to restless curiosity, and then, uneasy respect. The whisper had become thunder, and thunder has a way of waking the world. They called it Chateau Bellargin, once a fortress, then a seat of parties drenched in champagne, and finally, a rotting monument behind iron gates. Local kids dared each other to slip through the cracked stone archway, swearing they'd heard piano music drifting through the ruin. Now in the hush of dawn, Elias Blackwell stood alone before it. No entourage, no cameras, just a man in a hoodie and scuffed sneakers, staring at a place time itself had nearly given up on. To the world, the purchase felt like a flex, a billionaire's whim, proof that even wreckage could be bought if you had the right balance sheet. But Elias saw something different. Dormant kitchens that could serve hot meals, ballrooms reborn. As community centers, suites turned into safe beds for families who had none. He walked the cracked marble floors, each step stirring clouds of dust and history. Not everyone saw hope. Local real estate circles whispered that he'd strip the stone, sell the land, cash out tax breaks. An anonymous editorial in an old money magazine sneered. Good intentions crumble faster than castles. Paparazzi camped at the gates, cameras ready for proof that this man was a fraud. Yet day after day, nothing came. No demolition crews, no coming soon luxury resort signs, only surveyors and engineers with clipboards. Architects with Vask, ChatGPT, you said : next ChatGPT said, Section 2, Part 3. Blueprints of a better tomorrow. The richest families in the city kept asking, why bother? Why sink millions into forgotten stone when new glass towers made profit overnight? Elias Blackwell's answer wasn't broadcast. It was drafted quietly, late into the night, in rooms lit by a single desk lamp and hope. Architects unfolded ancient blueprints alongside modern sketches. One hall labeled Grand Ballroom would become a community dining room seating. 300 once-gilded guest suites would be redesigned as private family rooms, each with new plumbing, heating, dignity. Stone staircases, dangerous and cracked, were marked. Reinforce, not replace. Beauty preserved, but made safe for the most fragile guests. The new plans left space for a legal clinic, a classroom wing, a mental health counseling office. A hidden wine cellar was flagged to be transformed into secure storage for personal belongings, because even someone fleeing violence deserved a locked place to keep what little they had. Outside, a half-collapsed courtyard was reaped as a garden, vegetables, herbs, benches, under century-old oaks. Rumors leaked, of course. Whispers spread through city circles. He's turning it into a shelter, a school, a soup kitchen. Some mocked, some sneered, some scoffed. Another vanity project doomed to fail. But a few, only a few, quietly offered help. A local nonprofit sent grant paperwork. A retired stonemason wrote a letter, volunteering free labor. An anonymous donation arrived for fire safety upgrades. The castle was still silent, but slowly, it began to breathe again. Behind wrought iron gates and crumbling gargoyles, the old castle felt like a mausoleum waiting for a funeral that never came. Yet every dawn, delivery trucks rumbled up the gravel drive, unloading bricks, lumber, copper piping. Work crews in neon vests and dusty boots streamed inside, ignoring the gawking onlookers who gathered daily beyond the gates. Local newspapers ran snide headlines. Mysterious millionaire renovates ruin for what? From fortress to folly? Experts predict failure. Editorial pages speculated it was a tax write-off, a vanity stunt, maybe even a front for something darker. The old money crowd whispered over glasses of imported wine, a man like him, in this neighborhood. Just wait, he'll get bored, and flip it. They didn't know Elias had seen the blueprints every night before sleeping, tracing every hallway with a fingertip as if memorizing a promise. Inside, crews discovered more secrets, a hidden stairwell behind a false panel. Handwritten letters from the 1880s, pledging charity to war widows and orphans, proof that the castle had once sheltered the helpless, even in its earliest days. Elias ordered every letter preserved, framed in glass, displayed in the new lobby. As a reminder, this place was always meant to help people. We're just bringing it back to life. Neighbors muttered about property values. Bloggers mocked the design, but construction continued, relentless. The marble floors were cleaned, until they shone like moonlight. The dining hall's cracked ceiling was repaired, its fresco of angels restored by patient, careful hands. For every skeptic's sneer, a new wall stood stronger. For every cynical article, another volunteer appeared at dawn. The castle, once left to rot, now rang each day with the sound of hammers, drills, voices, and quietly, among the laughter and sweat, the idea that had once seemed impossible started to feel inevitable. And the rich elites who once scoffed found themselves driving by the gates more often, slowing down, unable to look away. As the walls rose higher, so did the curiosity. Locals leaned over fences to snap photos of scaffolding wrapped in ivy and tarps stamped with the project's cryptic motto, "For those forgotten." Each morning, Elias arrived in the same quiet way, hoodie drawn up, scuffed sneakers dusty from the walk across gravel. No armored SUV, no press entourage, just him, clipboard under one arm, nodding to workers as if they were equals. Inside, plans spread across folding tables like battle maps. Blueprints marked not for banquet halls or luxury suites, but dormitories with sturdy beds, counseling offices, classrooms, kitchens designed to serve hundreds, a wing marked sanctuary, a private space for victims of abuse, a floor labeled reclaim, workshops where people could learn trades, craft furniture, fix electronics, skills for new beginnings. Yet outside, gossip churned on. He'll never finish. A black man trying to play savior. Watch him fail. Just another ego trip that ends in foreclosure. Wealthy landowners whispered about lawsuits to stop the renovation. Online forums swirled with conspiracy theories, yet Elias pressed on, undistracted, as beneath the scaffolding and fresh plaster, the castle itself whispered of centuries past. Elias walked its corridors at night, his footsteps echoing where dukes once held feasts dripping with gold and cruelty. Tattered tapestries still clung to damp walls, woven with family crests that meant nothing now. In the cracked marble ballroom, he paused longest, a room built to impress, now lit only by his flashlight beams sweeping over fallen chandeliers. He saw more than decay. He saw memory. 1,000 souls who once labored unseen, scullery maids, stable boys, seamstresses, forgotten in the ledgers of kings, but not in the stone itself. And in that silent reflection, Elias vowed, this place won't glorify bloodlines and gold. It will honor human dignity. Outside, work continued. Bricks reset, ancient beams reinforced, a new copper roof gleaming under the morning sun. To passing tourists, it might look like vanity renovation. But to those who truly watched the small team Elias had gathered, it felt like resurrection. The castle was not just being saved, it was being reborn with a soul its former owners never imagined it could have. Weeks turned to months, and the world outside the castle barely noticed. Inside, however, the hush of history grew louder, until the day Elias invited the city's press. The skeptics, and the same rich elites who had sneered at him back at the auction. They arrived in polished cars, stepping out with cameras and cautious curiosity. The courtyard they'd once called beyond saving now glowed with new stonework and flower. Beds, bright petals softening old granite. When Elias emerged to greet them, he wasn't cloaked in billionaire bravado or draped in designer suits. Just the same quiet man in a dark jacket, calm and watchful. And behind him, carved above the massive restored doors, stood words none had. Expected Haven House, a refuge for the forgotten. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. A reporter whispered to another, did he really turn the castle into a shelter? Yes. Not a luxury hotel, not a private club. A shelter for the homeless, victims of domestic abuse, and youth aging out of foster care, complete with classrooms, a library, and counseling offices. For the first time, those marble halls would echo not with the pride of the powerful, but with the laughter of children who had nothing, and now had a place to start anew. And as the cameras flashed, Elias stood quietly, watching the stunned faces of those who had doubted him. Word spread faster than even Elias had imagined. Social media posts, short videos, local blogs, each telling the same unlikely story. The quiet black philanthropist who outbid billionaires, not for profit, but for purpose. At first, it was a curiosity piece on news feeds, a heartwarming contrast to daily scandals and cynicism. Then, something shifted. The story tapped into a raw collective ache. The sense that money only ever serves the powerful. Except, here, it hadn't. Television crews set up outside the castle gates. Drone shots captured the sweeping transformation. Ivy cut back to reveal hand-carved stonework, broken windows replaced with stained glass glinting like hope itself. Elias rarely spoke on camera, but when he did, his words cut through the noise like a bell in fog. We're all just one bad month away from needing a place like this, so why shouldn't it exist? The clip went viral. In a sea of polished CEOs and over-rehearsed statements, his quiet sincerity felt rare. Thousands shared it with captions like, "THIS is what real wealth looks like." He turned a symbol of old power into a home for the powerless. And for the first time in decades, that abandoned castle wasn't whispered about in rumors of hidden treasure, but spoken of in classrooms, churches, and dinner tables as proof that change could still come from unexpected places. The castle, once a monument to cold grandeur, began to breathe with new purpose. Crumbling halls were cleared of debris, ancient fireplaces cleaned and relit, old velvet drapes replaced with bright, durable fabric chosen not for style, but for warmth and comfort. In the courtyard, volunteers strung rows of soft lanterns that would stay lit through the night, so no resident returning late would ever walk in darkness. Elias didn't just pour money into restoration, he poured intention. Every wing dedicated to something different. A dormitory wing for mothers with children, with private rooms and shared kitchens. Another wing turned into workshops, sewing machines, woodwork benches, classrooms for adult literacy and job training. The grand dining hall, once echoing with the laughter of nobles, was repurposed as a communal cafeteria where no one paid a cent, but everyone contributed time or talent. Outside, a neglected garden was cleared and replanted. Local volunteers showed up, digging beside former bankers, single mothers, and college students. In time, herbs and vegetables pushed through the dark soil, small defiant signs that even what seemed ruined could flourish again, given patience and care. And still, through it all, Elias moved quietly among them, never giving orders loudly, never craving the spotlight, just pointing out loose stones, listening to complaints, and always asking the same question: what would make this place feel like home to you? As the restoration work continued, word of the project began to ripple beyond the ancient walls. What started as local curiosity turned into regional fascination, then national headlines. Journalists arrived, drawn by the irresistible contradiction: a reclusive black philanthropist pouring millions into a decaying European castle, not to turn it into a private estate, but into a free haven for those without homes. The rich elite, who had mocked Elias at auction now, watched warily from behind smoked glass and velvet ropes. Some whispered that he had inherited old money, others guessed it was new tech wealth. A few suspected something darker: money laundering, tax shelters, hidden agendas. But none could deny the tangible evidence. Every day scaffolding climbed higher. Every week, fresh plaster covered scars of centuries. Every month, new families. Moved in families who had once slept in cars or shelters, now tucking children into warm beds under stone arches. Rumors spread further still. A podcast episode titled "The Silent Billionaire's Castle" went viral, gathering millions of downloads. In it, former auction attendees shared hushed memories. The man in a worn hoodie, the quiet bid, the stunned silence that followed. People online debated his motives. Was this guilt money? A publicity stunt? Yet those who walked the corridors of the castle, who shared meals in the Great Hall, and sat at workshops late into the night, spoke only of gratitude and the quiet man who never asked for praise. Within those ancient walls, the silence became its own kind of teacher. Families gathered in the grand dining hall beneath crumbling chandeliers, breaking bread on long oak tables worn by centuries of use. Children chased echoes across mosaic floors where noble footsteps once fell. And in the flickering candlelight, stories surfaced, stories of loss, of resilience, of hope cautiously reborn. Volunteers, drawn by whispers of the castle project, arrived from nearby towns and distant cities. Some came to teach carpentry, literacy, or language classes for refugees. Some brought skills in architecture, eager to preserve the old stones while adding modern touches. Together, they discovered the forgotten parts of the castle: a hidden staircase spiraling into darkness, a locked chamber that revealed medieval murals faded by time, secret passages used by servants and sentries alike. Every new discovery felt like history itself, reaching forward to embrace the future. And always, somewhere in the background, Elias moved quietly among them. A nod here, a steady hand there, rarely speaking, always watching. The castle became more than shelter. It became a living museum of what compassion could build. a monument to the idea that dignity isn't something reserved for the wealthy. And while journalists begged for interviews and cameras searched for a close-up of the elusive owner, he remained what he had always been, a quiet force turning scorn into sanctuary. Stone by stone, life by life. You said: next chat GPT said. Section 3, Part 5, Rumors, Rich Lists, and Reluctant Fame as weeks turned into months. The story of the abandoned castle turned free shelter spread far beyond local papers. National news anchors recited the headline with growing disbelief: Black Philanthropist Transforms Centuries-Old Estate into Haven for the Homeless. But they stumbled when trying to explain why. Why would a man of wealth and power choose an act so quiet, so unprofitable, so radically humane? Online speculation exploded. Some said Elias was secretly royalty himself, reclaiming ancestral land lost to history. Others whispered he was an angel investor hiding from the spotlight, or a reclusive billionaire, known only by initials on offshore accounts. A few cynics insisted it was a tax strategy, a PR stunt to polish an unknown brand, but no brand emerged, no name emblazoned on marble plaques. Only the initials on the new library door, EM carved so small you had to lean in to see. Meanwhile, those once turned away by the world now walked halls where kings had slept. They planted vegetable gardens in the sunlit courtyard, taught their children to read beside stained glass windows once reserved for nobility, and for the first time in years, perhaps decades, they felt not like guests, but like residents. Rumors filled the air, but in the stone and soil, the truth spoke louder. Generosity had arrived not with trumpets, but on quiet feet, wearing a weathered coat and tired sneakers. Sunlight streamed through cracked windows, once choked with dust, illuminating the unlikely revival unfolding within. Elias didn't hire celebrity architects or reality TV crews to document renovations. Instead, he brought in local tradespeople, volunteers, and those who would soon call the castle home. Rooms once reserved for silk and silver were cleared of decay by hands calloused from hardship. A grand dining hall, echoing with the footfalls of auction day billionaires, now echoed with laughter and clinking enamel mugs. The cold stone walls that had witnessed centuries of conquest and greed became silent witnesses to rebirth instead. Children traced patterns on ancient floors, imagining stories of knights and dragons. Single mothers painted walls together, their laughter blending with the distant coo of pigeons nesting in the towers. Elderly residents, once invisible in crowded shelters, found quiet corners to read, talk, and simply exist without fear of being moved along. No spot was wasted. A crumbling wine cellar became a study hall, a watchtower, a meditation room. Damp servants' quarters, cozy sleeping spaces. Every stone, every arch, every shadow, repurposed with intention. Slowly, the castle's heartbeat returned, not as a monument to wealth, but as a living, breathing testament to dignity. And always nearby, though never front and center, was Elias, notebook in hand, checking leaks and loose stones himself, greeting each resident not with a nod of pity, but with an equal handshake. Through these halls of faded grandeur, a new kind of nobility walked, built not on lineage, but on compassion. Word of the transformation seeped beyond ivy-clad walls like dawn through broken shutters. At first it was just local murmurs. Curious headline in the town's modest paper: Mysterious buyer turns abandoned castle into shelter. Then, regional outlets picked up the thread, hungry for something more human than stock prices and scandals. The story had hooks: a quiet black philanthropist with no PR machine, a ruin reborn as refuge, and the twist that left even cynics blinking. He didn't rename the castle after himself, didn't brand it as an Elias Foundation project. It simply became known among locals as Haven. Soon, national journalists and YouTube documentarians arrived, cameras in tow, half expecting to catch the cliché of performative charity, but instead, they captured peeling walls patched by neighbors, courtyard gardens dug by those once sleeping on benches, and Elias blending in, not orchestrating from above, but shoveling alongside everyone else. Reporters marveled that the mystery billionaire didn't drive luxury cars up the gravel path or make sweeping speeches. He wore the same faded hoodie, jeans, and sneakers they'd seen on auction day. He declined sit-down interviews, suggesting instead they talk to the residents there, the real story. And so they did. A single father describing his first warm bed in months. A teenage runaway, now tutoring younger children in the study hall. An elderly woman wiping tears as she explained, for the first time in decades, someone looked at me like I belonged somewhere. As footage spread across platforms, TikTok montages, Instagram reels, long-form documentaries, the world watched something rare. Not just charity, but change rooted in quiet conviction. In comment sections and living rooms, a new narrative bloomed that power doesn't always roar from a podium. Sometimes it walks in softly, buys a forgotten castle, and gives it back to the people. With every viral headline, the castle walls felt a little less isolated, and the noise of the outside world began to echo inside. Not all of it was praise. Some local officials grumbled that turning the castle into a shelter would lower property values. invite undesirable elements, and tarnish the region's luxury tourism image. Whispers in high society circles painted Elias as a reckless outsider meddling in local affairs. A shelter in a historic landmark. Outrageous. They sneered over champagne. Old money families who had once smirked at the auction now saw their cocktail party anecdotes twisted by the press. Billionaires mocked him, now look at them. Their laughter, caught in candid photographs, became the perfect thumbnail for every video. Meanwhile, real estate developers circled, like vultures. They offered Elias double, even triple the purchase price, promising to restore the castle properly as a private hotel or luxury wedding venue. But Elias politely declined every offer, sometimes with nothing more than a gentle shake of his head. Word spread that the man behind Haven didn't bend to boardroom pressure or donor demands. He funded renovations quietly, pulling from his own pocket, not corporate sponsorships. There would be no branded gala, no charity auction bowl, just stone walls made safe, kitchens refitted, and dormitories warmed by real beds. The more they pushed him to commercialize it, the more stubborn he became. Not with anger, but with the same calm resolve that stunned them on auction day. Critics couldn't understand why pour millions into strangers who could never repay him. But those living within the castle's newly mended halls knew the answer instinctively. For the first time, they felt seen by someone who had nothing to prove and everything to give. The renovation didn't happen overnight, but it happened with a quiet determination that seemed almost miraculous. Each morning, the castle grounds woke to the rhythm of hammers, scaffolding rising along crumbling towers, and fresh timber arriving on the backs of dusty trucks. Stonemasons patched weathered walls once left to rot. Electricians wove new wiring through corridors. Volunteers swept glass from shattered windows and brushed off decades of neglect. Elias moved through it all like a ghost in plain sight, clipboard in hand. Jeans and worn boots caked with dust, his hoodie now replaced by a battered work jacket. To the outside world, he still looked like just another contractor until someone noticed the way foremen stepped aside for him, and tradespeople leaned in to listen when he spoke. Rumors spread among workers. That's the guy who bought the whole place, cash. They say he turned down triple offers from hotel chains. He eats lunch with the crew instead of behind some mahogany desk. By mid-month, the castle's grand hall was reborn into a shared dining space. Long reclaimed oak tables filled the room, sun filtering through repaired stained glass, casting colored mosaics across stone floors, where once only dust settled. One by one, small rooms became safe spaces, dormitories with clean sheets, a clinic with stocked medicine cabinets, a playroom echoing with the laughter of children too young to remember what safety felt like. From the road, it still looked like an ancient fortress, but inside, each repaired stone whispered a different promise. You belong. You matter. Your home. Word of the transformation spread beyond the ivy walls faster than anyone could have predicted. At first, it was local curiosity. Neighbors, driving by slowly, peering out of car windows at the workers and the scaffolding. Then, regional reporters began writing short pieces. Abandoned castle finds new life as community haven. By the end of the month, the story reached national news feeds. A reclusive black philanthropist purchases forgotten fortress, turns it into a free shelter. People online were captivated not by grandeur, but by quiet contrast. A man in scuffed work boots turning down millions, while giving the forgotten a second chance. A symbol of power, once the playground of the rich, becoming refuge for the powerless. Old money circles scoffed, but beneath the laughter was discomfort. They had scoffed at him during the auction, certain they understood wealth, power, and what mattered most. Yet here he was, proving that the greatest legacy isn't luxury, but humanity. Residents of nearby villages began showing up to help. An elderly woman baked bread every morning, leaving baskets by the kitchen door. High school students painted murals on the once blank walls of the children's wing, transforming stone into stories of hope. Every brick, every coat of paint, every donated book or toy carried something greater than monetary value. They carried intention. They carried the invisible signature of a man whose name few even knew, yet whose impact everyone could feel. Rumors became whispers, and whispers became legend. They called him the quiet benefactor, the man who bought the castle not to rule it but to open it to those who had nowhere left to go. As weeks turned into months, the castle itself seemed to breathe again. Once silent ballrooms now echoed with the gentle murmur of families finding peace. Children who had spent nights in cars or crowded shelters now ran laughing through vaulted halls, their voices bouncing off century-old stone. The grand dining room, where once only the richest dined under glittering chandeliers, became a communal kitchen and meal hall. Homemade soups, donated casseroles, and fresh bread replaced silver platters, but the warmth felt richer than any feast. In the West Wing, the quiet benefactor converted opulent guest suites into dignified living spaces. For single mothers, where lords and ladies once slept, now cribs and children's books stood beside restored fireplaces. One room remained locked, its heavy wooden door untouched by fresh paint. Some whispered it held the benefactor's personal office, a quiet place where he planned future projects late into the night. Others believed it was a space of memory, a tribute to someone he had lost, someone whose kindness once shaped him. Yet no matter how grand the castle looked on the outside, it was the atmosphere inside that changed everything. A place that once belonged to privilege now belonged to second chances. A home built not by blueprints alone, but by compassion, intention, and sacrifice. The castle kept its secrets, but the new story unfolding within its walls was visible to all, a fortress once defined by ownership now defined by belonging. Word of the transformation rippled far beyond the iron gates. In local cafes, people murmured over morning coffee about the mysterious man who had turned cold stone into sanctuary. In glossy magazines, journalists scrambled to learn his name, publishing half-formed rumors of wealth, tragedy, and redemption. A documentary crew requested permission to film inside the castle. They were gently declined. This was not a monument to be displayed, but a living promise to protect those who stepped through its doors. Neighborhood children snuck glimpses through wrought iron fences, whispering stories about a shadow prince who slept among ruined towers, guarding forgotten souls. To them, he became legend, a figure both real and larger than life. Wealthy families who once scoffed now spoke in hushed admiration, the arrogance in their voices replaced by a reluctant respect. They saw that what he built could not be bought at any auction because it wasn't made of bricks or marble. It was built of grace. Among ivy-clad walls, laughter began to echo each evening. Children's games in the courtyard, shared dinners. Under candlelight, quiet prayers whispered by new residents, thankful for shelter. The castle had been many things across centuries. Fortress, palace, ruin. Now, at last, it became what it had never truly been: home. Through all the noise, the articles, the drone footage, the speculation swirling on social media, one truth held firm. The man behind the shelter refused every interview. No stage, no press conference, no viral moment. His silence became its own story, more captivating than 1,000 headlines. Reporters called him the invisible philanthropist, but inside those ancient halls, his presence was deeply felt. Staff and volunteers knew him not as a billionaire or a myth, but as the quiet man who swept leaves from the courtyard each dawn, who carried firewood into drafty rooms before winter. Every morning, he would walk the outer walls, hand-brushing the cold stone, checking each corner for broken glass or signs of damage. He greeted residents softly, asking only, "You settling in okay?" Before moving on, rumors flew that he had grown up in poverty, that his mother once slept in shelters just like this, that he'd promised her on her deathbed to change what he could. He never confirmed or denied. All he showed was consistency and compassion that cost nothing to give, but meant everything to those receiving it. The castle, once a monument to conquest, now stood as a monument to quiet, steadfast resolve, a living rebuke to those who had only come to bid for its stone, never its soul. As days turned to weeks, the castle itself began to change, not in structure, but in spirit. Once it echoed with hollow drafts and memories of power hoarded behind locked doors. Now, laughter replaced the wind. Children ran down hallways. Once walked by armored knights, elders dozed peacefully in sunlit courtyards where duels had been planned. In the great hall, the fire burned not for show, but for warmth, its glow spilling across mismatched chairs, where people from every walk of life gathered. What had been a throne room became a dining hall, then a reading corner, then a classroom. Walls that had witnessed centuries of ambition now bore murals of hope, painted by residents themselves. One panel showed clasped hands under falling rose petals. Another, a phoenix rising from crumbling stone. When asked why he let residents paint on ancient walls, the quiet philanthropist simply shrugged. It's their home now. The history should include them too. Through whispered stories and passing smiles, the castle's legend grew, not because of a single man's wealth, but because he had chosen to share it. The transformation wasn't flashy. It wasn't about marble staircases or diamond chandeliers. It was about people, sheltered, heard, and finally seen. And in that choice, the castle found new life, as did everyone who crossed its threshold. Word of the transformation spread far. Beyond the crumbling gates and ivy-wrapped towers, what began as hushed curiosity soon sparked conversations in crowded cafes, newsrooms, and boardrooms alike. A billionaire turning an ancient fortress into a refuge for the forgotten. Unthinkable, yet undeniable. Documentary crews asked for interviews, but the quiet philanthropist rarely spoke on camera. He preferred the story to speak through actions, not words. Financial analysts scratched their heads, calling it a loss-making venture. Social activists called it the future of real power. Ordinary people, they just called it hope some nights. Flickering lights from phones outside the gates caught the murals on the castle walls. Photos spilled onto social media, children drawing in sunlit courtyards, volunteers serving meals under centuries-old arches. The man himself remained a mystery. To most, no luxury cars lined the drive, no flashy suits at galas. Only that same quiet presence in worn shoes, moving chairs, fixing hinges, and listening more than speaking. In an age obsessed with status, the castle became a quiet rebellion. Proof that kindness, when wielded with real power, could echo louder than any auction, gavel, or royal title. Time breathed new stories into the castle's marble halls. Children whispered about the man in the hoodie who wandered the corridors at dawn, checking broken windows and wiping dust from ancient stone. Volunteers told stories of him fixing leaky pipes beside them, sleeves rolled up, smile, gentle and tired. Tourists came, expecting a haunted ruin, and left speaking of something entirely different, a place alive with laughter, where history didn't keep people out, it welcomed them in. Word spread that rooms once meant for ballrooms now sheltered survivors rebuilding their lives. Hidden courtyards bloomed again, tended by hands that had once trembled in fear but now found strength in the soil. An old grand hall transformed into a classroom where single mothers studied late into the night. A tower room became a music studio where teens wrote verses about hope and pain, verses that found millions of listeners online. And over time, something extraordinary happened. The castle, once a symbol of exclusion and wealth, became something far rarer, a monument to second chances. And behind it all, the man who started it never sought applause. Only progress. Step by quiet step, stone by stone, life by life. They used to say nobility was measured by titles and bloodlines, etched in coats of arms and centuries of inherited power. But now, visitors whispered of a different kind of nobility, one measured in empathy, quiet, resilience, and tireless service. The marble plaques that once celebrated generals and dukes were joined by new engravings, names of shelter residents who earned degrees, launched businesses, reunited families, or simply kept going when quitting would have been easier. And the staff, they stopped calling him sir. They called him Marcus, or simply the founder, the man who ate lunch in the same cafeteria, fixed the same jammed doors, and walked the same cold halls at night. Wealthy donors still offered checks, but Marcus asked them for something else too: time. Come volunteer, listen to stories, share your own. And slowly, the castle taught even the powerful to see people instead of problems. A former billionaire board member later said, "I came here to give money. Instead, I found something money alone can't buy: perspective." In the end, the castle didn't just give shelter, it gave back something this world too often forgets: the quiet belief that no matter where you started, you can choose who you become. Word spread beyond the stone walls faster than any press release. Local news crews filmed the transformation, but it was the guests' cell phone videos that captured hearts online. A child running through a great hall, her laughter echoing off ancient ceilings. A man in a worn jacket standing quietly at a window, the sunrise painting hope across his face. A single mother finding the courage to read a poem she wrote in a vaulted library, while strangers clapped like lifelong friends. TikTok edits turned the castle into a symbol, from fortress of the rich to fortress for the forgotten. Journalists called it a social experiment. Activists called it a revolution. Some called it charity, but those who stayed knew better. It was dignity, carefully rebuilt, brick by brick. Marcus didn't chase the cameras. When reporters begged for interviews, he spoke softly about systemic change, not personal triumph. Stories matter, he'd say, but systems change lives. Yet despite all the attention, the true magic stayed in the moments no headline could capture. A volunteer teaching an elder to read, a teenage runaway learning to cook for the first time, silent hugs exchanged in moonlit courtyards, promising tomorrow will be kinder. Beyond its heavy oak gates, the world kept moving. But within, the castle had become something radical, a place where nobody needed to earn their worth. They already had it. Day by day, what began as an old building rescue turned into a blueprint others couldn't ignore. Nonprofits requested copies of the shelter's code of conduct and self-governance model. City councils sent delegations to walk the halls, taking notes about communal kitchens and conflict resolution circles. Other abandoned nests once left to rot under layers of history, and rumor found new champions, inspired by Marcus's gamble. But it wasn't just buildings that changed. Local businesses near the castle shifted. The cafes started hiring residents as baristas. A bookstore began hosting open mic nights just for them. Children who'd never stepped into a historic landmark now read their homework beside marble fireplaces. Social media called it the quiet revolution. Not protests, not speeches, but bricks, meals, and human warmth. One man's silent defiance against centuries of exclusion. And while commentators debated the economic models, Marcus focused on daily victories. A new garden planted by people once too tired to lift their heads. Walls repainted by hands once only known to pickpocket or beg. Sleep finally found by those who'd forgotten what it meant to rest without fear. It was quiet, yes, but it roared in the lives it touched. And that was a revolution louder than any billionaire's auction paddle ever could be. In the months that followed, what started as whispers became headlines. Newspapers couldn't get enough of the irony. A castle, once built to keep people out, now opening its gates to those no one else would house. Marcus refused interviews at first, staying true to the quiet part of his nature. But when he finally spoke, it wasn't about himself. It was about the residents who now had mailboxes with real addresses, about the children who chased each other in courtyards once reserved for royalty, about the dignity that walls and roofs can bring when society has stripped everything else away. Donors offered millions, but Marcus set terms: no naming rights, no corporate banners on ancient walls, only investment in people, never vanity. Architects and historians who once scorned his plan now praised its genius. "You didn't just preserve stone," one wrote in a glossy magazine. "You revived the human purpose it was meant to serve." Inside the great hall, the stained glass windows still glowed the same way at sunset. But now, instead of echoing with emptiness, the room filled nightly with laughter, music, and the quiet gratitude of those who finally felt at home. And so, the legacy Marcus carved wasn't written on plaques. It lived in warm meals, in safe beds, and in stories shared beside ancient hearths. A living monument, built not by power, but by kindness. Years later, tourists still gathered outside the castle's iron gates, snapping photos and whispering legends. They spoke of the day a quiet black philanthropist walked into an auction where billionaires sneered and rewrote history with a single bid. Schoolchildren on field trips heard the story too, not as a fairy tale, but as proof that power can look different. That wealth isn't just measured in gold or titles, but in the courage to do something generous when no one else will. Inside, portraits hung on the stone walls not of old aristocrats, but of the first families sheltered there. Faces of resilience, framed beside quotes about hope, dignity, and second chances. In the courtyard, volunteers planted gardens where weeds had once ruled. Fresh vegetables, blooming flowers, and laughter replaced decay and silence. And Marcus himself, he visited often, still dressed in his quiet clothes, still blending into the background. He'd sit under an ancient oak tree, talking with residents who barely knew the full story of what he'd done. He never corrected them. He let the walls speak for him, and the warmth inside prove what really mattered. Because in the end, Marcus didn't buy the castle to be remembered. He saved it so no one else would be forgotten. As months turned into years, the castle stopped being just his story. It became everyone's story. News outlets that once ran flashy headlines about black billionaire buys historic castle started covering something deeper: the way families found safety inside ancient halls. The way a forgotten relic became a living testament to dignity and hope. Weddings were held in the old chapel, quiet ceremonies for couples who once lived on the street, now standing together beneath centuries-old stone arches. Children ran through courtyards where wealthy heirs once practiced fencing, their laughter echoing off walls built to keep people out, but now welcoming them in. Documentaries followed, cameras panning over grand staircases and stained glass windows, but lingering longer on warm soup kitchens, literacy classes, and small dorm rooms where fresh blankets waited each night. Local volunteers gave tours, telling visitors not about the dukes and counts who built the fortress, but about the man who repurposed it. They spoke of Marcus, the quiet philanthropist in a worn hoodie, who shocked the rich elites by making compassion the final bid. Across the city, other wealthy donors quietly visited the castle. Some left checks, some left promises, some left with new ideas. The auction day legend turned into something bigger, proof that giving wasn't weakness, but a power few dared to use. People started to ask themselves, what would I have done that day in the auction room? Would I have sneered or helped? And slowly, the answers shaped small changes everywhere. Shelters improved, meals were donated, trust funds created to help those with nothing left to lose. Because Marcus's act had started as a single defiant moment, but its real victory lay in how it kept echoing. Long after the applause ended, it began quietly, almost invisibly, like ivy creeping over ancient stone. A wealthy art dealer in Paris funded a renovation turning an abandoned palace wing into transitional housing. A retired tech founder in San Francisco transformed an empty high-rise floor into classrooms for underprivileged youth. They all traced their inspiration back to the same viral video: a soft-spoken black philanthropist outbidding billionaires, then refusing to use his victory for vanity. Instead, he opened iron gates to people who had never dared step inside. Online, new accounts appeared under hashtags like #CastleShelter and #CompassionWins. Some users posted photos of abandoned buildings in their towns, asking, what if we turned this into something good? Slowly, it wasn't just talk. One city repurposed an old courthouse as a winter shelter. Another reopened a disused train station as a health clinic. Momentum grew, fueled not by shame, but by possibility. Nonprofits wrote proposals referencing Marcus's model: historical preservation meeting social justice. Banks, the same ones that had once doubted him, now offered microloans to similar projects, hoping to catch the next big story of redemption. And in every interview, Marcus granted few as they were. He repeated the same words: legacy isn't what you keep, it's what you set free. So the auction story became more than an internet fable. It sparked real-world blueprints, new plans drawn on old parchment, merging past grandeur with future kindness. What started as a single bid at a dusty auction became the seed of a movement, proof that even stone walls could learn to welcome. Weeks turned into months, and the story refused to fade. The video of Marcus, standing calmly in his worn hoodie as elite bidders gawked, kept resurfacing in lectures on ethical wealth, in high school debates about systemic change, even in boardroom PowerPoints about brand reputation, documentaries reached out. Universities cited it in courses titled Philanthropy and Power. Local newspapers that had barely covered the auction at first now sent reporters to profile the castle's new residents. Inside those ancient walls, stories unfolded that no camera had caught. A single mother found stable housing for the first time in years, her daughter now running through marble corridors she once only saw through locked gates. A veteran finally slept without fear, the cold stones softened by fresh linens and quiet dignity. None of this made headlines as flashy as the original auction, but it was real, solid, and lasting. The shelter's community garden took root. In the overgrown courtyard, murals appeared on cracked walls, telling stories of hope and survival, and every so often Marcus himself would walk the grounds quietly, listening rather than speaking. Local volunteers joined, drawn by curiosity and then by purpose. A chef who once cooked in Michelin-starred kitchens taught residents to prepare communal meals. A retired librarian organized evening readings by firelight, bringing new warmth to ancient halls. Online, people debated Marcus's motives. Some called it strategic branding, others claimed it was guilt money, but those who walked the castle saw something simpler, a man who had known exclusion, choosing instead to open doors. Bit by bit, the viral clip stopped being about the shock of the purchase. It became about what came after, not a symbol of wealth, but a testament to what happens when power chooses compassion over pride, when history, instead of ending, finds a second chapter. Months later, the media's tone changed. What had started as clickbait, black billionaire buys haunted castle to spite elites, evolved into deeper features asking real questions. Why are so many historic spaces closed to the very communities they once exploited? What happens when wealth doesn't run from the past, but invests in its repair? Talk shows debated it. Podcasts invited historians and activists to unpack what Marcus had done and why it resonated. One podcast host summed it up best. He could have flipped the castle for profit, hosted luxury weddings, or left it empty like so many do. Instead, he turned stone into shelter. That's power redefined. The castle itself became a quiet pilgrimage site. People traveled not to see jewels or tapestries, but to see proof that real change could happen, that exclusion didn't have to be destiny. They took selfies outside the gates, not for status, but to share. Look, people really can do better. Marcus refused most interview requests. When asked why, he said, "The castle story isn't mine anymore. It belongs to those living inside it," and with that, he stepped back, letting the residents speak for themselves. A former resident, once homeless, now a staff member, spoke to a journalist. "He didn't just give us walls and a roof. He gave us time to breathe, to hope, to figure out who we could be." It wasn't charity from above. It felt like an invitation to rebuild alongside him. Over time, even some of the billionaire bidders who had mocked him at the auction offered support. Donations, mentorship programs, and investment in local housing followed because the idea had proved too powerful to ignore. In a single afternoon, Marcus hadn't just bought a castle, he had bought the narrative back from cynicism and sold the world a new kind of story, that even the coldest stone can shelter warm. Human possibility. The transformation of that abandoned castle rippled outward in ways no one predicted. Local councils began to see value not in private exclusivity but in public legacy. 2 other derelict manors, once slated for luxury condos, were converted into community centers and vocational schools. The idea caught on because it wasn't just about Marcus, it was about proving something larger, that the past, however ugly, didn't have to stay ugly if someone had the courage and the resources to change it. Documentaries followed, not polished PR pieces, but raw, thoughtful explorations of systemic inequality and the small victories that chip away at it. The castle became more than backdrop. It was a living character in a bigger drama about what wealth could do if wielded differently. Even luxury media couldn't resist. They featured spreads not about marble staircases, but about tutoring programs held in grand halls, and food drives that used silver serving trays once reserved for nobility. The irony wasn't lost, but the impact was undeniable. International foundations called, asking Marcus to consult on similar projects worldwide, converting empty palaces in Europe, deserted forts in Asia, and mansions in the Americas into places of hope rather than symbols of hoarded power. And through it all, Marcus stayed remarkably silent. He appeared only rarely at evening gatherings, quietly checking on residents, listening rather than speaking. Staff knew him simply as Mr. Johnson. Visitors still whispered about him, but inside those walls, his legend faded into something better, a shared purpose that belonged to everyone. In a letter displayed in the castle foyer, Marcus had written, "We can't rewrite history, but we can decide what gets built on its foundations." That simple line became the unofficial motto of the shelter, etched onto plaques, printed on staff t-shirts, and repeated to every new resident who arrived, carrying more past than possessions. News crews who had once swarmed for scandal found a different story to tell, a grand dining hall echoing with laughter. Homework sessions held beneath chandeliers and counseling groups seated where aristocrats had once dined alone in silence. Viewers watched as Gilded Age opulence was repurposed, not erased. Every carved arch and stained glass window, now part of a new narrative. One young resident, previously unhoused, summed it up best on camera. "When I first saw the castle, I thought it was a place I'd never belong. But now, it feels like someone built it just to prove people like me do deserve somewhere beautiful." That quote went viral. People shared it under hashtags like #CastleForAll and #LegacyOfHope. And gradually, the mocking headlines turned into stories of admiration, not just for Marcus's wealth, but for how he chose to deploy it. He'd never asked for public thanks. But the impact became undeniable, measured not in gold leaf and marble, but in rising high school graduation rates, lowered relapse numbers, and reunified families. Data analysts showed that, in just months, the surrounding district saw a measurable drop in petty crime. Hope, it turned out, was contagious. Corporate donors who once dismissed the project began quietly contributing, some out of guilt, some out of PR strategy, but the money still flowed, helping keep the shelter's programs free and its doors open. What had started as a single quiet bid at an auction became an ecosystem of change no one had predicted. And through it all, the castle remained physically the same, ivy curling over stone walls, centuries-old iron gates creaking in the wind. But within, it was transformed, a place that didn't deny its history, but refused to let it be the final word. In every hallway, the past and present coexisted, velvet drapes beside chalkboards, ornate mirrors reflecting volunteers carrying donated food, luxury fireplaces, warming those who once slept on cold sidewalks, a new kind of inheritance, built not on bloodline, but on compassion. On the final weeks before the anniversary of the auction, journalists gathered once more at the castle gates. This time, there were no sneers, no sarcastic headlines, only quiet cameras capturing what the place had become. Reporters stood under the same weathered arches that had once framed billionaires' laughter, describing how a single act of silent defiance had rewritten a building's destiny. Inside, Marcus Johnson walked the marble corridors, not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. He paused by portraits of former noble families, reading their inscriptions, then moved on to where new photographs hung, graduation ceremonies, family reunifications, newborns and knitted hats. Where old wealth had once glorified bloodlines, new wealth now celebrated community. Some whispered that the philanthropist could have flipped the castle for millions. More turned it into a luxury hotel or private club. But those same voices fell silent when faced with the reality: hundreds now sheltered, thousands fed, and hope offered without a price tag. Former critics admitted grudgingly at first that the project had succeeded beyond anyone's forecast. City officials, once skeptical, now cited the castle as proof that private initiative could solve public problems, though few acknowledged the moral clarity it had taken to choose this path in the first place. But Marcus himself never courted applause. When asked why he'd kept his plan secret until the hammer fell, he gave the same answer each time: "If they'd known what I really intended, they might have stopped me." Sometimes you can only build something new by letting them underestimate you first. At night, lights glowed behind ancient stained glass, silhouetting new residents gathered in shared kitchens and study spaces. Passers-by saw not just the glow of wealth, but the warmth of shared purpose. And in the deepest chamber of that castle, past columns of cold stone, older than the nation itself, rested the real legacy. Not just a shelter, not just free beds and warm meals, but living proof that dignity is a choice. One quiet man in a worn hoodie had forced the world to watch, then showed them something even harder to ignore: that true power isn't measured in what you can buy, but in what you choose to build.